Well, welcome everyone. I'd like to welcome you here to On the Real Side. I'm Bob Mover, and today we've got a wonderful guest. Very, very happy and proud to have a dear friend and a wonderful musician, one of the great bass players ever. Mr. Ron McClure is with us today. Hi, Ron. You know, Ron is like one of those cats who has literally played with just about everyone from Blood, Sweat, and Tears, Joe Henderson, Stan Getz, Charles Lloyd, Dave Lehman, many people, and in fact been in very high-profile groups, and somehow, has not really gotten the recognition I feel that should have been his due to all these wonderful situations he was in. You remind me a little, just reputation-wise, another guy who was ubiquitous and cats don't think of. Do you remember Teddy Kotick?
Of course. I knew him.
Did you know him? I knew him a little bit too.
I talked to him. I tried to get him to take a gig or sub for me once, and he wasn't really happy that I called him, and he wasn't really too thrilled about it. But I remember him playing with Bill Evans and people, and I heard him on records. I actually spoke to him,
I actually played a couple of gigs with him at the Willow in Boston some years back. A friend of mine was a good friend of his, and brought him in to play with me, and I ended up hiring him, and we played a few gigs together, and it was wonderful. He really was.
Something that I first listened to. There was a lot of them like that you never heard of.
Yeah, there's so many beautiful bass players in that period, and you being about a dozen years older than me, I always envy. Like, I came up at the tail end of all of this, and you would have been right in really at the end of the prime.
Like, 41, so I got to New York in 61. I was 20, and Bill Evans at the Vanguard, Miles Davis, Sonny Rollins, you name him, all that stuff was happening, and I got to know and play with those kind of people. I played with Thelonious Monk and Jackie Byard and Bobby Timmons, Chuck Israel and Bob Cranshaw were the two guys that were really successful when I got here, and they both took me under their wing and helped me, got me auditions, got me on Broadway shows, Saturday Night Live, Sesame Street. I did all those kind of gigs because they brought me in.
Yeah, they were both. I knew Bob. I knew both of them pretty well. Bob especially was sort of family. In fact, we did a record with my daughter Emily, a tribute to Peggy Lee, and we had Bobby. We had Bob. Bobby's his wife, but we had Bob on bass. And when we tried to pay him at the end, he handed us back our bread and said, "Your family." And so he didn't even, but boy, did he help us on that date. He knew every little thing of, Peggy's arrangements. And, anyway, he was a brilliant guy. All right.
Yeah.
All right. He'd always go, all right.
He was doing Sesame Street and Saturday Night Live at the same time, playing with Sonny Rollins at the same time. I hear tell that his pension from the union is in excess of $10,000 a month.
Yeah, he was talking about that one time. We were hanging out, and he said, I have quite a large pension, and I've never drawn from it. He said, I kept thinking, I'll wait till I'm old. And he said, and then I looked out the other day, and I said, damn, I'm old.
Yeah,
I better draw from it.
I subbed for him. He would be the bass player on record at Saturday Night Live or Sesame Street, but he would give me like $80 to do the rehearsal or the show. So I was happy to get the money then, but he got the residuals and whatever the gig paid. He just he helped people like that. He helped a lot of bass players like that.
Yeah,
the same audition with Stan Getz. Because of him, he had me sit in with Bill Evans with Lee Konitz. We sat in together.
Tell me about that. That was so you met. What was the chain of events? Stan Getz.
Well, I was 1963 or 64. I had been in New York. I met Chuck Israels, and he had got me an audition with Stan Getz He sent me in to sub for him with Bobby Timmons at the 5 spot. He got me on Promises, Promises Broadway show. And he invited me down to Vanguard when he was playing with Bill and Arnie Weiss. And Chuck gave me his bass, and Lee Konitz sat in with us. We played Tenderly really fast, which I didn't really know. And Bill had his head down, you know. And I was embarrassed. I don't think I played very well, but I got to play with Bill because of him.
Was that the only time you actually played with Bill?
Yeah. I've talked to him, seen him since. And he said we should stay in touch in case Eddie Gomez ever left. But when he left, they had auditions. They didn't call me. So I went down, and Michael Moore was auditioning. It was Philly Joe and Bill.
I remember that band. I remember a very sad evening with that band. Tell me how your experience. I'll tell you mine.
Kind of drugs. And then when Michael Moore came off the bandstand and saw me sitting there, and he said, "I've always wanted to play with Bill, but not like this."
Yeah, it was a weird set. Bill came off the bandstand.
Terrible, you know. It was really sad.
Yeah, Philly was not in. Philly Joe was kind of a little too drunk to play.
Oh, they were shooting coke.
Was it shooting coke? Yeah. So there was.
Do it, yeah.
Well, I guess that that was also something I think Bill was into too toward that period. But
they were both, and they rushed together, banging and rushing. It was really hard to listen to and harder to watch.
I was there for that the set on the very last night, and I had a strange experience. Bill came off the bandstand, and I knew Bill. I'd had my own little experience with Bill, though I never played with him. But we became kind of friends. He would talk to me sometimes between sets. I'd just have a little conversation. He once stayed after a gig when I was a teenager and played a couple of my tunes, which was really, beyond the call of duty. I was just going to lay him on him. He said, "Come on, I'll play him for you." And he commented on which one. The one I thought he'd like, he didn't like as much. The one I thought he wouldn't care for, he kind of liked. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. But he would come off the bandstand, and he kept saying, "How do you tell a friend? How do you tell a friend?" He just kept looking in the air, and somehow he sat next to me against the wall at the Vanguard. I didn't go to the dressing room. And he just said, "How do you tell a friend?" And I said, "Bill, how do you tell a friend what?" He said, "How do you tell a friend that you can't play with him anymore?" He said, "Philly Joe is my favorite drummer and my best friend." He said, "And now tonight," he said, "I realize I've been, this has been the last straw. We've tried to play together again, and it's gone. Whatever we have is not there, and it can't continue. And so I have to tell him tonight that this will be it." And so, he looked so sad to have to do that. So you were there too.
I saw that Michael Moore was playing.
Yeah, I remember Michael Moore. He told me the same thing. He said, "Oh man, I didn't."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was one of those moments. The first time I heard of your name, I believe, was through Wynton Kelly, because when I was about 17, I was hanging out and playing at this after-hours club called Amos, the place called Amo Music Studio, and it was on like 21st Street. It was up about 10 flights of stairs, probably just 6 flights, but long stairs. And he was a bartender at Slugs. And Amo would open his own little after-hours place. It would open about 4 in the morning, and people would play till around noon. And, you never knew it would be up there. It was like all kinds of cats were up there. I mean, Wynton, Cedar Walton, he had Big John Patton playing organ because the piano was really kind of out of tune. But a lot of cats would play it. And I got to meet Wynton and Kenny Dorham up there. And Evelyn would let me stay at her house because I'd be there every weekend night. So I'd spend weekends practicing in Evelyn's living room. And Wynton was, very helpful, would hang out with me and show me stuff. And one time we were just sitting around, smoking a joint and drinking. He always had this big jug of wine with him. I think somebody called him Wine Tone because he always had that. And he was talking about how could it be that I've gone from Miles Davis, everybody that plays with Miles becomes famous and well known. He said, but except Red Garland's back in Texas and playing in cocktail lounges, and me, he was working at the riverboat with Tyree Glenn. a traditional jazz trombonist. He said, so I've gone from my house that I had this beautiful trio, and that's where I heard your name. Because he said it was Jimmy Cobb and Paul Chambers and me, and then Paul got sick because that was the year 1969. Paul was very ill. And he said he'd gotten you around 67, a couple of years before. He had this marvelous young bass player, which was you, and he just couldn't get enough gigs.
No.
What was that like? Could you tell me something about that experience?
Ready to hear my story now that you've told yours? Um, I was playing with Maynard Ferguson in Atlantic City at this giant club, and we opened for Wes Montgomery with the Wynton Kelly Trio. It was like either late 1965 or early 1966. And Jimmy and Wes and Paul, Wynton were on the stand with their tuxedos on. And of course, Maynard's band, we were all standing off to the side. I was standing there holding my bass, having played to open for them. Well, everybody wanted to hear, that great group. And Paul didn't show up. And everybody was waiting and waiting, waiting. So finally, Jimmy Cobb hit a few rim shots, looked at me, pointed at me with his drumstick, said, get up here. You got to play with us. Paul didn't make it. So I went up there and I played the set with him. And the next month later, we were playing the same double bill, but it was at the Village Gate. And Ron Carter had replaced Paul because they had to let him go. And I played with Maynard again with the sextet this time. What's the big band the first time? And after we got finished, Wynton came up to me and said that Ron was late because he was doing a record date. And could I play the first set with him? So I played the first set with him. So I played with him for 2 hours already. The next day, Ron Carter called me and he said, I'll give you $20 if you play the first set again tonight for me because I'm still doing it. So I played that night with Wynton Kelly and played with Charles Lloyd after that. And no, I wasn't. I guess I was playing with Charles. Yeah.
Oh, wait a minute. Was it Maynard after that?
I misspoke. So I played 3 hours with him all together, and they took my phone number that night. And I was at home. I lived on 71st Street then. Got a call from Wynton saying that he and Wes were going to the West Coast for 9 weeks. Would I like to go?
Wow.
Oh, let me think about it. Okay, I thought about it. I played 9 weeks.
Let me look at my book.
Yeah, with Wes, and then after that, we did some trio gigs. We did the record Full View in '66 with Jimmy Cobb for Orange Keep News and Dick Katz on Milestone Records. And
what is the name of that record?
Full View. And then we did a live at the Left Bank Jazz Society with George Coleman. That's on VJ Records. That came out. They all came out on CD. So I played with Wes, and I played with Wynton for like another couple of years after that. And we were doing the Gold Coast in Brooklyn, a little bar with an auto-tune piano with just duo. And then he finally passed away in a hotel in Toronto. He had a seizure. He had a seizure the first night I played with him.
He had diabetes, right?
Oh, yeah, he had epilepsy.
What's that?
Epileptic.
Epilepsy. Oh, right.
Well, that's what killed him. I mean, the first night in Seattle, we were playing at the Penthouse. Well, that record just came out a few years ago. Live at the Penthouse, Wes Montgomery, Wynton Kelly Trio with me. And that's on at Resonance Records in LA, Zev Feldman. And so we were having dinner at the hotel, Jimmy and I and Wynton, and he went into a seizure. So Jimmy said, help me get him to his room and get out of here. So he got him to his room. He kept him from choking to death, I guess. So I went to his room when it was time to play the gig, knocked on his door, and he came to the door and said, who are you? And I said, I'm Ron, your bass player. He said, oh, yeah. When he sat down, he played the same way he always played. But, I mean, it was a rough time,
Oh.
Rough time.
He wasn't very old. I mean, I think he was 40 something when he passed, right? He was
39 years old.
Yeah, because I was 17, these guys already seemed very old.
Yeah.
And then when I thought back later, gee, they were in their 30s. They were young men. So that was he was a delightful guy, though, wasn't he? He was really
Jimmy Cobb tells the story that when they were playing with Miles, people would come up to them and say, "Which one of you is Miles Davis?" And they would always point to Wynton. And he'd end up buying them drinks, and hanging out with them. They would play that little game with them.
And he probably didn't deny it.
Like he was just such an easygoing cat. I mean, nobody on earth ever swung any more than he did. I mean, what a feel.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, he would. I remember he would show me something. He showed me that there were passing changes that you could. I've been practicing Green Dolphin Street in the living room, and when it goes to da 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 da, da the original key is C, but we play an E flat, so E flat, and then it was two measures. That was what the changes said of E flat major. Then he was always playing something in between, and I asked him what that was, and then he showed me how you play a 5 chord into the A flat minor, so you can make it like put a turnaround in to get there, and that was like a revelation. And as he showed it to me, he would show me one way. He'd say, "But then again, you can do this, and then again, you might want to do that."
That's how you get your identities from the stuff you play that's not in the real book. In between, I mean, I played with Richie Beirach for the last 40 years, and he never plays the same thing twice. And we'll just go places, and I'd get ideas that he hadn't thought of, and we communicate on that level. On the bandstand, you're making it all up. You're not staring at the real book playing those hideous changes.
Yeah, well, I think it's a funny quote from Eddie Condon. He said, "A true jazz musician never plays the same thing once." So then, your first, I think, time that, like, I think that, you played, well, you already played with Maynard and you played with Wynton and you've done this, but I mean, a band that got, let's say, huge superstar, quote, recognition, which superstar wasn't even a word then, but that Charles Lloyd, the original Charles Lloyd quartet, the Forest Flower Band, was, I think, beyond, stretching beyond a jazz gigs into like a pop world. How did that come about, and what happened? How did that, what were the circumstances of that, and how did that feel for you?
Well, I was playing with Steve Kuhn with Marty Morell, and Steve Kuhn and Charles were friends. I had met Charles, but I didn't know him. I met him in Atlantic City when I was playing there. In Philadelphia, I had met him, and he came over to the showboat, and we talked, and I could see that he had a vision for the future, and a very colorful and dramatic and articulate guy, So Steve Kuhn told me Charles was looking for a bass player, and you have an audition at 3:00 on Thursday.
I set it up for you.
3rd Street, over the firehouse, the walk up, 3rd floor Richard, they called him, and he lived on the 3rd floor. So I went up there and auditioned with Keith and Charles and Jack.
What 3rd floor Richard? I just didn't that.
Yeah, there's a tune called 3rd Floor Richard. It's a Charles Lloyd blues. So wonderful blues. And that's one of his nicknames, So, and Charles called me Doug, like for Doug McClure, the actor.
Right.
The time that I worked with him, he called me Doug. Doug, you looking for the flood? I mean, your pants are too short. And he said, if he didn't like what I was wearing, he said, the Barracuda is coming for that shirt, Doug.
Charles talked
to me in riddles. He really did speak in riddles. I mean,
almost like a Lester Young language, right? Of his own. Almost.
Really, go into deep explanations. They would ask him how he did his music, and he would say, "It's magic." But I didn't have to play the bass if I didn't want to, if I could think of something else. So, playing at Albert Hall. This is after he hired me. We played the Fillmore in January of 1967. We were the first jazz band to play there.
Right.
And that was incredible. And we went to Russia, 67. And that album came out from the Russia, live, Charles Lloyd live in the Soviet Union. They told us we could play for a half an hour. Everybody else, groups from Siberia, were playing for 2 hours. They didn't want us there. I had my own KGB guy standing outside my door, following me everywhere I went.
Really?
What a woman on me after the concert in Tallinn. A young woman taught English at the university. She came up to me with a microphone saying, "Isn't it better here than in the United States? Aren't there people dying on the streets of the United States?" And I said, yeah, probably, but they could become president if they got their shit together. We went and took a train from Tallinn to Moscow, and they separated Charles, Keith, Jack, and George Avakian and I, put us all in different cars so they could work on us, right? So the same was not only in the same car, he was in the same sleeping compartment, and I was right directly across from me in the top bunk. And I opened my bunk, and she opened the curtain. She was there in a negligee this time with a microphone in her hand, asked me word for word the same question. Isn't it better here than in Russia? Isn't it true people are dying on the streets? I jumped out of my bunk. I walked through the train yelling, George Avakian, George, until I finally found him. And I told him the story. He said, good, I'm glad you found me. He got us all together in one car.
Wow.
They wanted to create an international incident where, American jazz musician, that's
Defect.
yeah.
They want to be the defect.
Better there than in the United States and molested a journalist, or something. They were trying to create some reason to have something to say about us.
That's an incredible story.
I mean, it's in my book coming out soon.
Yeah, we were talking about that. I'm really excited about that you're writing those memoirs.
Yeah, I got about 700 pages right now. We got to get it done,
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I'm working on mine as well.
Most people.
Yeah, but that's quite a story. I never.
Yeah, well, that's just the beginning. That was 67. I stayed till 69.
With Charles, and then of course there was the I guess so. It's funny. Steve Kuhn wasn't the pianist in that band at that time. Was it Keith Jarrett already?
Exactly. Cecil McGree had left right after that album Forest Flower came out and really launched Charles's career. I mean, that was his big record, and I jumped on right after that came out, and so we were playing all these big venues. He didn't want to play jazz clubs. He called them saloons. He said, I don't want to play saloons. So we played the Fillmore in places like the Avalon, the Family Dog. We did college concerts and festivals. We never went into a studio. And so all the records, the 3 records that I'm on, or 3 or 4, I mean, they're all live records. He had a bad relationship with Joel Dorn at Atlantic Records, so we didn't go into the studio. We never recorded anything in a studio.
He just did.
No, Fillmore's like Love In, Journey Within. Then we did Live in the Soviet Union and the soundtrack. Those are the 4. I mean, I overdubbed. There was a town hall concert the day before we went to May 8th, 1967. We recorded the day before town hall. I had to overdub the record because Jack and Keith buried me. I didn't have an amp, so you couldn't hear the bass. So they had me come in the studio and overdub a couple tracks. It's embarrassing. You could hear both basses at times.
A little bit like Mingus at Massey Hall.
Yeah.
Is that kind of early overdubbing type of?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think I got $65 to overdub that record. Union scale.
Yeah, weren't you saying there was something that you did was also done with early overdubbing with Don Sebesky or
one day I took Don Sebesky.
Blood, Sweat, and Tears, yeah.
Arranging course. Sebesky, I did one day with him for Sylvia Sims, which I never heard. I don't know. I was a big band, an orchestra with Sylvia Sims. And Blood, Sweat, and Tears, yeah, that was like 10 years later. That was 74.
Right, and then didn't you write an arrangement that actually used overdubbing or?
Oh, yeah. At first I did the Mirror Image, which was my tune on the first album I did in 1974. And in 75, we did an album called New City on Columbia. And I wrote the piece called No Show, which was an instrumental. And we used the studio and we doubled the horns. We brought in like Ian Froman, or whatever, I think that was his name, a synthesizer player. And he did a sweetening date. And I played acoustic bass and electric bass on No Show, on Mirror Image. I played the melody with the bow, and I played the soundtrack on electric bass, the rhythm track.
And that was really innovative at that time, right? That was unheard of.
So what was there, It was, available, so we did it. And we did on No Show. I mean, on that record, New City. I'm sorry. We did rhythm tracks for some of the tunes. They hadn't even written the horn parts. So I'm looking at a chart written by Tony Klatka with just Larry Willis and Bobby Colomby and George Woodenius on guitar playing some basic soundtrack. We had no idea what was going to go on top of it. Then he brought the lyrics and the horns and strings even. So we did Life by Toussaint. And I played, very safe on the record. But when we went out to the live concert, by that time, I knew the music and I had really come up with some things to play. It was much better.
Yeah, they called that layering in those days, right? They would layer.
I had no idea what was going on top of the rhythm track, so you didn't play too much. I just played the basics,
And who were the? I know Joe Henderson was with Blood, Sweat, and Tears for a little while, and were you on the band when he was on it?
He had left, and I was in the next generation.
Gregory Herbert, was that Gregory?
I took Jimmy Fielder's place. I was the second bass player to play with Blood, Sweat, and Tears. And when we were in Fort Lauderdale playing at Joe Namath's club, the Bachelors 3 in Fort Lauderdale,
right.
This incredible bass player on this record turned out to be Jaco Pastorius with Wayne Cochran's CC Riders. And I heard the sound and the solo that he played, and I asked the bartender, I said, who's the bass player on that record? He said, oh man, don't bother me. This guy, he's crazy. I can't stand him. He comes in here all the time. His name is Jaco. He lives around the corner. So I got a quarter and I got Bobby Colomby, who was the owner of the band and the drummer. And I dropped a quarter and I played that track and he turned 3 shades of purple, and I said, uh-oh, I'm in trouble. A short time later, Jaco was playing bass with Blood, Sweat, and Tears, and I was looking for a gig. His house in the New City, and made that record that made Jaco famous with Donna Lee and everything. It was with
that was at Bobby Colomby's house, you said?
In the studio, in his house where we did New City. I called Colomby. Bobby's house in New City had a pool and everything. It was like a camp, like a summer camp. We'd go swim in the pool, record.
Yeah, well, Jaco used to play in Miami. I kind of grew up in Miami. Yeah. And Jaco was actually the first time gig I had as a leader. Jaco was the bass player. And I was 17 and he was 16, I think. I think he was either a year younger or a year older than me. I can't remember, but
good then.
What's that?
Great then?
Oh, he was already great. He was just, we had a kind of big argument. I used to go hear him at the Barn with Wayne Cochran. That was a place on the 79th Street Causeway where he would play with them. And, it was a trio gig. And it was in Fort Lauderdale at this little club. And Jaco, I wanted him to play upright because I didn't like electric bass. And I was very, at 16, you know everything. And he was 16, he knew everything too.
Yeah.
He didn't know the same everything. But I remember I asked him, who's your favorite bass player? And he said, me. Yeah. I'm my favorite bass player.
Bobby Colomby's story, which is false, of course, about how he met Jaco. He said he was walking in the park in Fort Lauderdale and he met this beautiful woman. And he asked her if she was married. And she said, yes, I'm married to the greatest bass player who ever lived. And Bobby said, oh, I have to meet him. And hence, your bass player dropped a quarter in the jukebox and you fired him to get this guy. Good choice. But I mean, I'll never drop a quarter on a bass player like that again. Jaco. I mean, he was like Mozart or, Michael Jordan. I mean, once in a millennia kind of guy.
Yeah, it's like what Bing Crosby said about Frank Sinatra. He said, if talent like that comes around once in a lifetime, but why did it have to be my lifetime?
There you go. I mean, it explains why I didn't get some recognition in the 60s. I mean, you think about Scott LaFaro, Gary Peacock, Ron Carter, Buster Williams, on and on and on and on and on. Niels Henning, Orsted Patterson, Jenny Clark, all of my contemporaries, and they were already known. I mean, you had to walk through that forest of,
yeah, well, you were up there with them.
I got to play with a lot of people like they played with when they weren't there, and I got a lot of the residual gigs, but there was gigs all over the place, and there weren't that many bass players, but there were those guys around. And you're not going to take away the glory from Ron Carter. I mean, he's on thousands of records, for good reason.
Yeah, and then I mean there were the relatively older cats too. I mean
A composer at the time of Bach, I mean, like you can write more shit than Bach, go right ahead,
yeah, right.
Charlie Parker was a gunslinger to be a lot of dead alto players.
Right. That's what Nigga said. Did you? Well, there were so many. I mean, there were all those. I mean, you probably experienced, had some stories just by hanging out, at Jim and Andy's or some of the other places, like
Cancer cigarettes behind the bar. He calls it the cancer shelf.
the cancer show. Yeah.
They kept the cigarettes, And one day I was at Jim and Andy's, and he didn't know me. Jim was behind the bar, and suddenly he started yelling my name. Ron McClure, is Ron McClure here? And it was Dionne Warwick. She found me at Jim and Andy. She needed a bass player. I went to college with her. She was sitting next to me in Mr. Robinson's second year harmony class. And wasn't anymore. And somebody handed me this LP that she had made that was already platinum. And she called me. She wanted me to play bass with her. I played with her for a few months.
Oh, that's funny. Well, I know Jim and Andy's had an extra phone, or had a phone there that if you needed a musician, that phone was a separate phone.
Line to Radio Registry, which we all belong to. I mean, you get
Judson
a call.
55. What was that number? Judson.
I don't remember the number, but I remember being on Radio Registry. You get called for an hour jingle with a possible 20. And Jim and Andy's became the possible 20. That was the title of the name of the club, a restaurant and bar, because people got a jingle. They give you an hour with a possible 20-minute overtime. So they used that term. Possible 20. That was the name of the club. That's what it meant. But so the studio guys hung out there. So I hung out there hoping to get some gigs. And I got one, but with Dionne, but I wasn't what I was waiting for,
Yeah, but that was,
Well,
for me, as a teenager, just walking in there, and you look at one table and Clark Terry and Snooky Young and Joe Newman are having a conversation.
It was a good thing to go there and mingle and get to know people and get them to know you. There's nothing anymore. There's no place to hang anymore. I used to go to Bradley's, the Knickerbocker, the Vanguard in the back room. I don't think there's no more scene, and there isn't as much apprenticeship as there used to be that I had, and you probably had too. I mean, the kids today, they don't have that opportunity to play with people like I got to play with, that were established and great, and they, basically got on your case if you didn't do the right thing and led you to the right place, yelled and screamed at you.
There was a lot of that, but it was really,
Some tough
it was beautiful. I mean, Bradley's was like graduate school.
I got all my cross training in there: drugs, alcohol, and jazz.
Yeah, that was it.
Down there, hanging out with Jimmy Rolls and Tony Bennett and Richie Beirach and
John Abercrombie and
I mean,
and
I didn't go out until after midnight when all the straight home, and we hung out there until sometimes 11 in the morning.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I remember those when Bradley closed the club.
Sleep and get there and do it again.
Yeah,
That's a great time.
One time, Bradley didn't extend credit as a rule. That was a big thing with Bradley. But one night, I was having kind of an unhappy love affair with the girl in Europe, and I really felt bad, and I didn't have any money. I had enough for 2 drinks, and I said, I'm going to try it. And I asked Bradley, I said, Bradley, I've got a gig on Tuesday. This was now Thursday of the previous week. If you would give me credit tonight, I really need to get wasted tonight. I'm really, just so down and this and that. And I know you don't give credit, but if you did, I promise you, as soon as I finish my gig on Tuesday, I'll be here and I'll give you the, the $10, $12, whatever it is that I drink up tonight. And he said, I don't do this, but I'll do this tonight.
Yeah.
So I went and I paid him back.
Yeah.
And
you got a minute, and you take you to the back room and give you a little marching powder,
That's right. And then he became, he told me how he got the club, which was by owing everybody money.
Yeah.
He said he was such a bad drunk that he said, I owed everybody money. And then I inherited some money. And the first thing I said, well, I know I'm an alcoholic and a drug addict. I guess I should buy a bar. He
They
said,
put a face on that place. I mean, he was there. I mean, he made sure everybody listened to the music, and he picked the musicians, and like, you know, I even played gigs with him playing piano. He
well, he
hired
loved to play piano. That was when the
changes and everything. He just really didn't have good time. He really couldn't play in time very well. But he paid me, I mean, like, I think $50 and dinner to play from 7 to 9 with him on several occasions.
but
And
he loved harmony too. You know, he had bad time, but the thing that he would do,
all Beirach and all Herbie and everybody went in there. He knew all the tunes with the best changes. I mean, he just wasn't,
yeah, and
wasn't a bass player.
the other beauty of that was when he started playing, he'd be saying, "In there, for heaven's sake, let's fall in love." Tommy Flanagan might get over and say, "You know what I like on the bridge is this." And next thing you knew, you had 6 guys around the piano, all playing the bridge of "For Heaven's Sake." You know what I mean? And yeah, that was like, you know, Bradley sort of stimulated all that to happen.
Let it happen. It happened. He didn't do it. He let it happen. And people went there because they felt comfortable. And it just went on and on. People come in and would have these conversations at late hour. Until we didn't leave until the guy came in to clean the kitchen and sweep, wash the floors in the morning, you know. Oops, 7 o'clock in the morning, we have to go home. Yeah. That was great. I mean, I miss that. I mean, there's
Yeah,
nothing.
it was a very rare, you know, experience to. He would let me get my horn out real quietly, which was exceptional because I could play very quiet. When they played, they'd be playing these changes. I'd have my horn, and I'd just be whispering the melody. And when somebody said, "Well, I like this change here, this turnaround," I would just quietly run the change, and that was sort of my, you know, a real education.
Got rid of the cabaret law in 1989, which is the year Bradley died. I mean, they had, you know, I was played there with Richie Beirach with Bobby Battle on drums. I think it was the first drummer to play there. Then at the end, I mean, he had Roy Hargrove playing there and, you know, all these horn players. It became something else after he died.
He did, you know, and the thing was though, you could, even before the cabaret law, get away with a little sitting in because because Bradley liked me, and I mean he let Al Cohn. Like for example, one night I went to hear Tommy and George Mraz, and Al Cohn was playing, sitting in on tenor, and then they invited me up, and I had one of the nicest sets with the 4 of those guys.
No, there was no percussion. I used to play at Green Street with a big band, but you couldn't have a drummer.
Yeah.
So, you know, I mean, it was all about, and they didn't realize that the piano is a percussion instrument technically.
Right, that's true.
Then everything. But I learned a lot playing duo down there. I mean, because you're half the band. You play the melody on half the tunes. You play a solo on almost every tune. There's no drummer to lean on, so it made bass players a lot more prominent, and you got to play a lot more than you would. I mean, every time you add another person, the bass player plays less, you know. And the big band, you just play quarter notes, you know, basically.
I learned a lot with pianos, with drummerless bands too, because working with Chet Baker, Chet would sometimes, you know, if he had a quartet, he would hire another horn player because of his teeth situation, which was usually me, instead of a drummer. So we kind of got to hear a lot of bass players in New York naked, sort of, you know, without drummers, and you'd really hear where people's time was at, you know.
No, I'm living in the Chet Baker's apartment. I've been living in it since 1977. We were playing around the corner on 86th Street at a club called Strikers. Olivia Stryker was this woman. And I played with Chet there. And I had just left Blood, Sweat, and Tears in 77. And I wanted to move back to the city because I was living up in Ardsley. And of all people on earth, I asked Chet Baker if he knew of any apartments. And he said, "I think you can have this place I'm subletting from this guy Sugarman. I'll ask him." He actually remembered the next night he came in. He said, "Yeah, he's going back with his girlfriend. Go see Frank at 2E. They'll give you the key."
That's funny that Chet could hook you up.
265.
When you say Chet Baker's apartment, that's like an oxymoron.
7 West 87th, 265 a month. It's gone way up now. It's 800.
Wow, well, Chet was living in so many places at that time
Yeah, I mean,
that. But I worked with him at Strikers quite a bit. I think you joined that band right after I left.
Rosenberg, Jeff Brillinger.
Yeah, we had Cameron Brown or Dave Shapiro and Harold Danko.
It was Phil Marcus, I think, I played with.
Yeah, that was a different band, but
Same band. He was nice to me. I mean, Chet was cool. I mean, I had a great time with him. And last time I saw him, we were in Hamburg, and he came in with Herb Geller. And Chet had this brown linen suit on. It looked like he had been sleeping in it for a month. And his face looked like 20 miles of bad road, And this last time I saw him, and he sat in with us. This club in Hamburg.
yeah, yeah, I remember that club in Hamburg. It was the loudest club in Germany.
Last time I saw
Because usually they were very respectful, the Germans. They'd be very loud between sets, and the music was it the Domicile, or I forget the name of it, but I remember
Munich, yeah.
Domicile, right? And man, it was,
The house bass player. I didn't take it. I think George Moraz took it. He wanted me to go there for like $125 a week to be the house bass player.
Really? Why would Moraz take that? I mean, why?
He lived in Europe. I mean, I don't know. I heard that he did. I don't know for sure, but I
He could have lived there, but
mean, I didn't want to, leave New York.
but speaking of Bradley's, the aftermath of Bradley's, I left town for a few years, so I didn't have that. But I remember a conversation I had with Red Mitchell concerning that, because Red used to do his sojourn yearly at Bradley's for quite a while.
He lived in my apartment when I was in Europe many times. He'd stay here and we'd hang out. And they say an evening with Red Mitchell was an evening with Red Mitchell. I mean, he did a very strong opinion about politics and music, and he wasn't afraid of expressing it. I got to know him very well.
Yeah, I got to know him quite, to some extent too. And one conversation I remembered, because he kept saying, well, one year we've got to do a duet week at Bradley's. And, I'd been out of town living in Canada for a couple of years, but I ran into him at a festival in Ireland. And I said, and we were hanging out. And I said, man, I'd still love to do that week at Bradley's with you. And he said, no,
I heard it.
that will never happen.
He didn't do it at Bradley. He did it in Sweet Basil. He did a week with Warren Marsh, bass and tenor. I was there.
Who was that with?
Sweet Basil, Warren Marsh, sax tenor player.
Warren Marsh, yeah, I know Warren well.
They did a
beautiful, beautiful record of duets together. I think they did it at Red's place.
Well,
the record was recorded in Copenhagen.
They did a live record at Sweet Basil.
Really, they did. I'd love to hear that. I heard other records that they did, but I asked Red about Bradley's, and he said, I'll never play Bradley's again. And I said, really, what happened? He said, well, Hank Jones and I, speaking as Red, did 2 weeks there. And, it was a great 2 weeks. I said, imagine it would be. He said, yeah, we only repeated one tune. We played Body and Soul twice in the course. But other than that, we played new tunes every night. And we were just, so at the end of the night, at the end of the gig, I thanked Wendy. I said, gee, thank you, Wendy. It was a lot of fun. Really appreciate it. She said, fun for you, but not for me. I said, what do you mean? She said, well, the people you drew were all your AA friends came in. And they sit and they drink a Coca-Cola all night.
About that.
So I didn't make any money this week.
Yeah.
And Red said from that on, when Wendy did that, he said he'd cut all ties with Bradley's at that point.
Yeah, I never played
gone for a couple of years.
I asked her for a gig once, and she said, let me explain something. I had been playing at Bradley's for 20 years, and I asked her for a gig one night, because I hadn't played there in a while. She said, let me explain something to you. Here at Bradley's, we hire people who can really play.
She said that to you?
I never went in there again.
Yeah, well.
I mean, fuck her,
This is what I heard about her. I never met her, except it answered a good question.
Wouldn't let her in.
I would stay in there and close the club with Bradley, and then I'd ride in a taxi. I lived around McDougal Street, so he'd drop me off, and then he'd go to the 55, which was the other club he owned, And I said, this man never wants to go home. And when I heard about her, I understood why.
He wouldn't let Bradley wouldn't let his wife in the club while he was working there, while he owned it. So she came in and out of revenge, I mean, basically destroyed it in a couple of years. It was gone. She tried to cost, I mean, more money than she had. She lost the building. They owned the building.
Really? Yeah, well,
I mean, an institution. I mean, I'm writing about it in retrospect, trying to think about what it meant. You know, I mean, it was really nothing like it. It never has been, never will be, probably.
No, it was definitely.
I mean, it's a place where people went about the music and drugs and alcohol, basically. You know.
Yeah, and
it's a great.
And actually,
when she got it, the fun was gone. You know, she was like, you know, like became a tyrant, kind of. You know, it was all about her for a change. You know. And,
yeah, well, it was one thing that made me miss New York less.
Yeah.
I would hear the Bradleys had turned into that.
Yeah, well, the same
very bad.
Gordon, I mean, I don't know, Lorraine. I went in there to give some music to Michelle.
Another one.
And I had my bass in the cab and I'd stop to give Michelle music, some rented music that I had. And she was at the door and I said, Lorraine, I have this package for Michelle. I can't come in. She said, Lorraine? Like, how dare you call me Lorraine? Well, we're like, 3 years old.
Those of you who don't know, Lorraine, we're talking about the Village Vanguard. And Max Gordon, for many years, presided over it every night. He was there in the corner with his cigar. And his wife, when he died, she took over. That just go ahead, Ron. I just wanted to clarify that for people.
Same as Bradley's. I mean, it's the same kind of scenario.
I mean, and so she didn't want you to call her Lorraine.
Last time I played last time I played the Village Vanguard was with George Russell's band in 1984. We made the Time Spiral with the big band. It was the first and only 5-star record I've ever played on. I was playing Fender bass. I haven't played there since. I haven't been in there since.
Yeah, I've hardly gone in there out too.
I mean, I don't recognize it anymore. It's not the same. Nothing is the same. Sweet Basil was great. I mean, McKell's, Visione's, all these clubs that were great. I mean, that were like user friendly for guys that weren't like, Miles Davis. I mean, they didn't hire like the biggest names, but I mean, you could get a gig and play there,
Yeah, I mean, well, there were, so many places like that, and there were so many deserving places, where you'd hear the Clifford Jordans, and, and Bill Hardman's, people that really played well, Blue Mitchell, all those people would be, without being household words, but, you really heard some wonderful music.
Yeah. I mean, the Soji Ohtani, what's his name? Ohtani might be the best baseball player on the Dodgers, but there's like 26 or more people on the team. He's not the whole team, and he can't do it by himself.
Yeah, I mean, same thing. Aaron Judge is awfully good, but
the whole team. I mean, if the catcher doesn't catch the ball, I mean, the guy on third scores.
Yeah, I mean that's and and there are also, I mean, it's so much. It's sort of like the history of jazz has been so codified now.
Yeah, well,
there were 5 pianists that made sense in jazz history. There were 5 bass players. There were 5 and basically it's all taught by what a friend of mine, Tony Gasolano, used to say. There were blowers and no blows, and the world could be divided into that. So, for instance, somebody who doesn't even play an instrument can be a blower, because when you talk to them, you realize that if they did play an instrument, they would play well. And then there are other people who don't play instruments and they don't know anything. And those are what he called the no-blow mofos. Yeah. And you can even play an instrument and be a no-blow.
All you need to do is watch the Grammys and you can see how that goes. It's people that can either write or sing or play that are covered with tattoos with, and with 100 people behind them with bombs going off. And it's all about what it looks like. It's a show. People are addicted to, it's all visual now. It's more about what you look like than what you actually do.
As they say, how does my sound look?
Yeah.
But I mean, it's a no, what Tony used to say was, Bobby, he'd say, it's a no-blow world out there. Like right now, the biggest no-blow in the world is Donald Trump, if we don't count Putin.
Yeah. what he's a perfect example of where we've come to. It's about because he's a TV personality. He's a clown. It's a show. He's more entertaining than Hillary Clinton was, or certainly more entertaining than Joe Biden. But he's a complete buffoon, and he's a danger to humanity.
Yeah, so there's your no blow.
He's
And the
likely.
danger to jazz is these people who said that there were only 5 piano players in history, and there are only these people that make sense, that you can't, if you were, these days, if you were Clifford Jordan or Art Farmer or somebody like that, you might not work at all.
Right.
Except you work in Europe, probably in Japan, but in the United States, anyway, we won't bitch about that, but, we did lose
Everything's
a lot.
visual. We're addicted to sensationalism, youth, and now with the Black Lives Matter, people are bending over backwards, to make up for slavery, these people that produce jingles. Even the, what's his name? He said, look at all the black people on commercials. I don't know how long it's going to last, but sure, all of a sudden you see, all these different combinations of people on every commercial. It's no accident. They're, it's deliberate, they're combining people
of different races and heterosexuals and homosexuals and
black people, with a Chinese guy and with a white woman, black guy with some guy.
Well, probably people won't like this, but
well, it's like a quota system,
Well, I was watching TV lately, and I noticed that there was a whole lot more mention of Pride than Father's Day.
Yeah.
There was nothing about Father's Day, and everything was about Pride. So I'm for both, but nevertheless, let's get some balance in it.
No, Spike, what's his name? The movie producer, Spike
Lee.
Spike Lee. He said, I saw an interview with him, and he said they were asking about Black Lives Matter. And he said, well, you watch TV lately, you watch commercials. He said, man, there are certainly an awful lot of black people all of a sudden in commercials. He said, I don't know how long it will last, but it certainly has changed, And I remember when I came to New York, they said, wait till you get here and try to get a gig. They look at you first, If you don't look right, they probably won't listen to you,
That's got a lot of it, and of course the obsession with youth. A friend of mine who's a fashion designer in Paris was in her late 40s, and she still looks great, and she made some beautiful designs, and she was excited because French Vogue had called her to talk to her. So I asked her, I saw her after she came from there, and I said, how was your interview? She said it was a little bit strange, and I said, why? She said, well, they kept asking me about this young designer. What do you think of her? And she's only 24. And what do you think of this one? She's only 26, and this and that. And she said, finally, I said to the interviewer, my friend said, gee, I wasn't aware that youth was a quality. I thought it was a condition.
We're addicted to all these things that they think might sell more units, and people are probably making that come true. People respond to that type of stimuli,
Yeah.
Probably not going to go very far,
How long did you work with Joe Henderson? Joe.
Oh, 1970, and then again in 1984, and then I subbed. Well, 1970, I worked with this big band, did the Lighthouse, couple records. I'm on a record called "In Pursuit of Blackness."
I remember that record. Yeah, that's right.
I'm the only one in pursuit because everyone else had achieved it. And the solution: Lenny White, George Caples, and Woody Shaw. That was wonderful, and Joe was great. And then I went to him in Europe in '84 with Lenny White and Michael Urbaniak, and Vladimir Sendesky was the piano player. We did a tour. I was playing Fender fretless bass, and came back to New York. We were going to play the Vanguard, and Joe just kept going back to San Francisco. So Michael Brecker took his place at the Vanguard for a week. That was '84. Then I subbed for George Mraz with Joe and Al Foster at the Iridium, and it was on, Columbus Circle.
Yeah, what did it feel like? I mean, I mean, I got to know Joe a little bit, and when you got past his, I mean, kind of shyness or whatever, but he would open up. It was great.
When he was living on Montague in Brooklyn, I walked up there to play with him, and he lived in the kitchen between. His bed was between the stove and the refrigerator, and the bathroom was at the end of the bed, so he didn't have to move. He had a house in Twin Peaks, California, a house, and with a beautiful, home. He had made some money, and somebody went to visit him, and they saw this door that was closed, and he said, "Joe, what does this door lead to?" He said, "Oh, I don't know." And he opened it up, and it was the main room. With this bay window overlooking the Bay Area. I mean, it was this magnificent room, and he had never been in there, and he owned the house. Call me, we would talk. He would talk about about different piano players. I mean, like he said Mal Waldron. He said, "What do you think of his playing?" I said, "Well, I like his tunes." He said, "But yeah, but his tunes, his playing, he plays right here in the middle register. He never goes over here. He's always." And he asked me what I thought of Dave Friesen's sound, and I said, "Well, I don't think he has one." He said, "That's what." And play music for me, and they said, "What do you think about this and that?" And I said, "I would rather not."
He must have appreciated your honesty.
We talked for hours. I mean, on the train in Brooklyn, in Germany, we were talking about what makes jazz jazz, and like Lenny White was with us, and he stormed out of the cab and he said, "What would you know about jazz from your Lily White background?" And stormed out. Joe said, "That was terrible. Why do you think he said that?" So I don't know, but we had this conversation and it really pissed off Lenny.
Lenny said that.
Make you listen to stuff. You put your earphones on like listen to this, listen to that. And sitting on a train. I mean, he was wonderful to hang out with, And he played differently every night. I mean, literally, he could play Blue Boss and Shades of Jade and Invitation every single night, and it would be fresh and new every night. It didn't matter what he played. He was really an improviser.
Yeah, I noticed that about him too. And there's a story that I heard about him that I like. Supposedly he was teaching at one of those Jamie Aebersold camps.
He was.
And yeah.
I did one with Woody Shaw, Joe Henderson, and Slide Hampton, Ronnie Matthews, and Lewis Hayes.
You did one of those. Oh.
It was in Illinois.
Well, so supposedly, Joe was standing. His class consisted of he would play tunes with the students, and then he'd just go, "Okay, next tune." He didn't really make many comments or anything. He just blew with them.
And with Art Farmer too, the same thing. He didn't say a word.
Which is, probably the best way to learn in a lot of ways.
I asked Art Farmer, "What do you think about this?" He said, "Oh, that's cool."
Yeah, well, supposedly one of the students complained, and they went to Jamie and they said, Joe doesn't say anything. He's like, it's great to be with him and everything, but he's not saying anything. So Jamie calls Joe in and said, we had a little complaint or a comment on your teaching. That do you think it would be possible to maybe say something because one of the students mentioned you're not saying anything. So Joe grunts or something, and he goes back and teaches the class again. And I guess he knew intuitively who had said it. So he's there. I think it was a piano player, and they play a couple tunes, and then Joe walks over and says to the person who had made the complaint, he said, "It's not making it."
It's not making it. I did a workshop with Aebersold in California, and there was this tenor player in my ensemble. He didn't have an embouchure. He was just blasting, his cheeks puffed out. So I said, there's some good saxophone players on the faculty, like Dave Lehman and a couple other guys, that you might go talk to them about your sound. He said, "Oh man, I've got a good sound. I have a band. I play gigs." And so he went and complained to Jamie, and Jamie called me and he said, "Ron, you can't say things like that to him. We won't get his money next year." That's what I learned about teaching. You don't say anything, don't complain, don't give anybody any reason to complain. It was like that. I did clinics with him all the time up at the Vermont Jazz Festival, and at NYU, I used to teach people how to study with Don. I said, ask him a lot of questions. He doesn't talk a lot, but he knows everything. He can do anything if you just guide him to what you want to know.
Who's that?
Don Friedman. We sit there. He didn't say anything. Same thing like Joe, teaching.
Oh, Liebman, you said?
Don Friedman.
Oh, Don Friedman. I'm sorry, because these Zoom things, you can sometimes not hear it clearly.
Yeah, I know. But anyway, I mean, I know people that I've never short on words, as you can tell.
No, you've never been, but
You know,
but
cut from the same cloth, I think, in many ways.
yeah, yeah. And someone else who was not short on words
No,
was Lee Konitz.
no.
We both have experienced
You
quite a bit.
ever go to the restaurant with him? He would be
Well,
talking on a cell phone or just talking in general. You say, "Shut up!" in a restaurant crowded with people because people were talking across the room. He hated it.
yeah, and as he got older, he got a little more unabashed about
I
what
did
distracted him.
sit up on a plane in Argentina, and there's a baby like 5 rows behind him, like 3 months old, crying. He stood up and said, "Shut up, you little creep! You're only thinking about yourself." That was the funniest thing I ever saw.
That's hilarious. Yeah.
Lived around the last 40 years. Nice to see.
He told me a story about he was on a train in Germany, and this lady was on a cell phone very loud behind him, and he kept telling her to be quiet, and she didn't. So he took her cell phone away from her, and then they stopped the train, and he said the German police came on and actually arrested him for she. And he said, man, I felt really weird, like a Jew in Germany being escorted off a train by guys in uniforms. I said,
That sounds like something that could happen. I'm amazed that people didn't complain more about that, because in restaurants he was impossible. He would change tables like 3 times, and people would be holding hands and whispering at each other, and he would scream at them like
in Russia, he said, "This is
scream, shut the fuck up!" Like the people that were just sitting there having dinner, like holding hands.
yeah." But
That Bob, shoot me, please.
yeah, I mean, did you get to know Gary Peacock at all?
Oh man, did I ever? And more recently, I just heard this record he made with Paul Bley called Partners on Owl Records. It is the best I've ever heard anybody play the bass in history. I mean, he was absolutely. Now I know why Keith Jarrett wanted Charles to fire me and get Gary. He was hands down like the best of anybody. I mean, he wasn't great at playing tunes and changes like with Keith Jarrett. I didn't like that too much. But as a free player, with Bley, who was also a tremendous free player, they created stuff on the spot that was just amazing. You have to hear this record, Partners. Gary
I've
Peacock.
heard about it. Yeah, I want to.
89. I was playing with Paul Bley at the same time. I had no idea. I just heard of this record in the last few months. I mean, I've listened to it 100 times. I mean, you've never heard a sound like that, or technique like that, or an imagination like he had. And he borrowed my bass, and I knew him pretty well. And he was a gentleman, and I mean, an astounding bass player. He was Scott Farrell on steroids. He kind of played in that style, but much stronger. I mean, he was like, I mean, wow.
What was interesting with him too? I went to a recording session one day. Paul was one of my daughter Emily's 2 godfathers, and we were quite close.
Hey?
Yeah, and so Bley invited me to this record day that he was doing with with Gary and Paul Modian, and they took a break. And when they took a break, Peacock went to the piano and started playing Bud Powell.
I'm not.
I thought that was very interesting, because Bley had been playing all this kind of very, kind of far out things.
Yeah.
And then Peacock just sat down at the piano and played "I'll Keep Loving You," and
Yeah.
it was,
Well,
but as a person, I mean, I asked Paul what he was like because I never really got to know him, other than hello and that. But I said, "What's he like, Paul?" And Paul said, "Mercurial."
like people asked Charles Lloyd how he did it. He said magic.
Magic, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but Gary, I heard he did an interview once. I read or I heard, and he said, "There's nothing I want to say, and there's nothing I don't want to say." That's great.
Nothing I want to say.
You have to hear this record. I mean, anybody listening to this podcast, if you haven't heard Partners by Paul Bley and Gary Peacock, you must find it. It's on Spotify. It's recorded incredibly well, and it's about 20 improvisations, solo and duo. It's phenomenal.
Wow.
Never heard anything close to it ever. There's no tune, nothing written, nothing premeditated. It's all improvised. And the other one is ESP, Spiritual Unity with Albert Eiler and Sonny Murray, 1961.
Yeah.
The Ghost. Playing like cymbals in no time, and Gary was really pulling the string, and this Albert Eiler was screaming like he was being stabbed. When he
and that two go Mothers.
I love that stuff. It was like
that two go Mothers.
Free music.
You know, that record had a funny effect on me. It was really weird. I would sit and listen to it, and after getting through the first abrasiveness of the first moment, I got in a very peaceful state of mind. It would somehow put me in a very almost trance-like state of inner peace. But I said, how is this music? It's so harsh. It's doing this to me.
I didn't expect anything like that in 1961 when it came out. I never heard anything. I heard The Shape of Jazz to Come, Ornette Coleman, in 1959 when I was still in high school. I brought it back because I thought there was something wrong with the music because there was no chords, there's no piano player. And this Bob Grenier, who's the hippie kind of drummer at New Haven, worked at Cutler's record store at Yale. He said, McClure, you're just not ready for it yet. And that was true. Lonely Woman, all those that he played. Yeah, there were no chorus, no piano.
When I was 16 in 1968, my dad got a job working for ESP Records for Bernard Stolman.
Oh, yeah.
And they had these studios in, I believe they were like down in the 20s or something. There was the ESP offices. And I would go there to practice after school because we lived in a residential hotel. We couldn't really practice there. So after school, I sometimes went down to Bernard's offices and what's funny, my dad was a swing trumpet player. He hated this music, this ESP music. He said it was completely insane and made no sense, but he tried to sell it, you know. And anyway, what was the interesting part I was going to tell you about was that I'd be practicing I'm learning standards. So I'm playing There Will Be Many Other Nights Like This. In the next room, Albert and Donald are practicing. The two of them are going, and it was very weird because as I'm learning the changes to There Will Never Be Another You in the background, I'm hearing these guys playing these free duets.
Nothing was like this way, it was all this way.
All that way, but it was like I just learned as a natural background. I started to hear these in the background. And
I'm doing a gig this Saturday with Rich Perry and Steve Johns in Riverside Park at the Reds Play tennis courts with just Rich Perry and I. I don't want to hear any. I have this, like, he has this sense of melody that's incredible, and he would get bugged with like piano players that played too much behind him. So we don't have one. We're just playing trio with drums.
Well, you can do that.
Yeah, with him you could do that.
Yeah, he's like my favorite, really, of that generation. You know, we're about the same age. And
every tenor saxophone player, hands down. He's great.
Yeah, he's tremendous.
Yeah.
Well, he's another one. You know, see, that's the thing, that
he doesn't get the credit.
You don't have the right record contract, or you don't know the right people. Like, why isn't Rich Perry as well known as some other people that are?
Everybody's talking about Emmanuel Wilkins. All my students and saxophone player, I asked them, who do you listen to? He said, Emmanuel Wilkins. I've listened to it, but everybody's playing as much as they can at all times. There's really no story, and there's no, the writing isn't impressive, and the improvisation doesn't seem to have anything to do with the writing, and it's just people playing running scales and filling the space.
That's what I'm feeling from a lot of it. I haven't heard that particular cat. You know, I've got a couple of young people that have been studying with me that Grant Stewart has pushed my way from his downtown Tribeca Jazz School, who are very talented. There are a couple of cats that are really, really good, but who's on the scene now? Because I guess partly because of my emphysema, I don't really go out because I don't want to be in public where I'm a high risk as far as catching things. And there's not really anything that's grabbed me.
I don't. Every time I go out, I wish I hadn't, and I don't go out much. And people send me stuff to listen to, and there's no there sometimes. I mean, I hear a lot of people playing, but I mean, that Kenny Barron said in an interview he did recently that he said the kids today they seem like they're running scales. He said we used to remember solos that people played. You could walk around, you could sing along with a Miles Davis solo or a Sonny Rollins solo.
Yeah.
They played melodies. Lee Konitz used to have people sing. I do that. So I get guys that I had a tenor player in my ensemble this year at NYU, and he came in like playing a barrage of notes. And Michael Wolf and I both had him, and we talked about him. And Michael said, "Play something you haven't played before, just to get him to stop." So he said, "Well, what do you think I should do?" I said, "Well, you're playing a tune with like complex harmony. I'd like to hear the harmony. I'd like to hear something that related to the tune we're playing." I said, "I don't want to curb your enthusiasm by making you stop doing what you're doing, because what you're doing is incredible. You're searching, and you play the horn great, and you're playing a lot of stuff, but it doesn't have anything to do with the music we're playing, particularly."
Well, I read what Kenny said too, and I mean I've heard him say it too. That there's no the focus of onto lyricism, and the idea of just making little poetry out of your lines. Making a phrase rhyme in a certain way.
Yeah.
That there's a dearth of humor and romance. That and I think that it might be the world we're growing up in, that they didn't grow up in a world with melodies and stuff. Like you and I were really the last generation that heard show tunes, and even the Beatles had melodies.
Yeah, right, great song. I mean, we were doing our Ebersol clinic, and with Slide Hampton, and somebody asked if the Beatles had made any contribution. And I had just recorded Here, There, and Everywhere with Charles Lloyd on the Love In album. And he said, well, the Beatles, Slide Hampton said, "Oh, the Beatles killed jazz." And I said, "No, jazz, if it died, got shot itself in the foot." And I used to buy the Beatles records, and while I was playing with Charles Lloyd, I loved that stuff. It had nothing to do with jazz. It was just good music. I mean,
there's some. I've been there's some Beatles tunes I love to quote because the intervals are so hip. Like "Someday you'll find that I have gone." I can't sing anymore because of my operation, but "I'll Follow the Sun" is just a beautiful combination of intervals. And those first notes,
brilliant. And they were. I played with Blood, Sweat, and Tears. We were not songwriters. So like Columbia and Fred Heller fired James Guercio, who produced their second album. And Guercio went out and got this little band called Chicago. Have you ever heard of them?
Yeah.
The record they made is platinum. They're songwriters. I mean, that was the difference. I mean, I don't write lyrics. If I did, they'd be pornographic and humorous.
Right. Like Red Mitchell.
I heard Red play solo. He made me cry. I heard him in L.A. His solo was so beautiful because he sang. He played like a singer. He played songs. I mean, I could hear this beautiful melody coming out of him. It really brought me to tears. It was so beautiful.
Yeah, he did play lyrical bass. So you know who I liked as a soloist doing it years ago? Michael Moore.
Oh, yeah, Mike. I knew you were going to say that. Yeah, he was another one. Yeah.
He lyrical solos.
He played ideas. I mean,
yeah.
you hear these electric bass players. I play electric bass too. You hear these guys like they're going ticky 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 ticky. I mean, I can't do that. My brain doesn't, or my hands don't work that fast. But that's all they do, and they think that's what it's about. Who's going to hire you to do that? What singer is going to hire you to play that behind a singer? Nobody. I said, you better learn how to. Better learn how to be an accompanist, because you play bass. You better get used to that. Because nobody's going to hire.
One thing Konitz talked about that I remember that made a lot of sense with me was he said, a lot of people play vocabulary. He was discussing a player that we don't have to talk about, but he said he's really good. He really plays the tradition. He really understands this. He swings. He does all this, but he plays vocabulary. You want to transcend vocabulary and get to ideas. And I think that's really a beautiful, what I would try to teach my students and teach myself is
It's like a bag full of groceries. It's not dinner.
Yeah.
Take those elements and learn how to put them into some kind of palatable combination that will please people and nourish them, you know. And music's the same way. People like they want me to teach them licks, and they try to do, what else can I do? I said, well, how about doing what's there? How about playing the tune we're playing? How about playing something that sounds like the tune? And how about the changes that are there that you don't know the scales to before you do something else? I mean,
Well, that's where the singing along with records, I tell people, don't worry about playing it. You know, you might do that. Guy says, well, I transcribed. I met a guy who had transcribed probably 100 Coltrane solos and he still couldn't play. I mean, he could play the horn and this and that, but he couldn't play in the sense, couldn't improvise anything. And, you know, so I think I said you should try singing 5 Lester Young solos.
breathe when you. I mean, just guitar players, piano players, and bass players, they don't have to breathe. They can go forever without taking a break. And you don't walk away remembering anything. I mean, it's impressive. But I mean, I think that's what people think. I mean, that's what their criteria for excellence is how much can you play? You know, Don Sebesky used to say, if you don't have a reason to write something, don't write it. He said, less is more. Of course, Richie Beirach always said, well, sometimes less is just plain less, you know.
Yeah, well, Richie would say that.
You know, I mean, you know, I know people think that all the Stanley Crouch told me all the great jazz has already been played. There's nothing left. I said, well, how come people are still playing it? And there are plenty of students that are studying it all over the time. It's not about being more than somebody else. I mean, just be yourself.
Yes, Stanley Crouch once said to me that Warren Marsh and me were the only 2 white players he liked. I said, that's it? I said,
Bass player that could swing because he heard me play with Wynton Kelly. And he said, but none of those other guys can swing.
Yeah, he liked to say these things, you know. And
Dogmatic opinion about a lot of things. And that Ken Burns thing on jazz with 19 hours of garbage. I mean, it was so racist. It was unbelievable.
oh, it was unbelievable. I mean,
I mean, I was throwing things at the television.
I think you could. You know who? I happened to talk to Nellie Monk when that thing was happening. And she said, she said, you know, they totally didn't get it. She said that whole Junkies on Parade. She said they made us, that's how she put it. She said they made us to be degenerates and addicts and this kind of thing. She said what he missed the whole factor that we was having fun. There was a lot of fun that we was having. There were tragedies. It was too bad about Ernie Henry and Bird and these people, but main thing was how much fun we had. You would never have any sense that there was any fun in that music.
Right. And prefaced everything he said by so-and-so, a black man, so-and-so, a white man, as if you couldn't see it for yourself, as if that's what it was all about. And then he spent like 14 hours on Louis Armstrong's funeral because they had all the footage. And then it was Wynton Marsalis, like he had created something or more than a good job for himself.
Yeah, it was.
Like he hadn't moved the needle forward at all, but he's a great musician, but he's not a Louis Armstrong or a Miles Davis.
Well,
at Lincoln Center, but I mean, it's a different capacity.
There was an attempt that I won't go into the whole story of it, but when that happened, Hank Jones, Bob Cranshaw, and I tried to do another program that would be the true story of it and have Hank as our touchstone, like the way they used Wynton. Hank would be our centerpiece.
Yeah.
And the real story of jazz.
Yeah.
And
well, his anyway.
Well, his story, but actually the story of the real cats that were around too. We would be talking to a lot of the people. Well, like kind of what I'm doing now.
Yeah, wouldn't we all have kind of done the same thing? I mean, I have my story, you have yours, and he had his. I mean, almost anybody could do something like that and would all be different. That's what makes it great. It's not about, they made it sound like it was one thing. Ken Burns, they made it sound like it was black music and everybody else was just an imitator or something, and it did more damage than it did good, I think.
Yeah, I think that's what, but even black people, like Sonny Rollins told me, JJ killed himself the week that when that show was on. And Sonny said he didn't want to. He was not certainly not going to blame that for JJ's condition. JJ knew that he was dying, and he didn't want to burden the people that were around him, and that was his main motivation for checking out. But he had seen. I asked Sonny if he had seen any of the jazz, and Sonny said he hadn't watched it because he didn't really want to watch that kind of thing. You know, he said he heard he'd been in it and this and that. He said, but JJ was very upset because he said the only time he appeared in it was in that whole thing about people that were strung out. And they had that long, like what we call junkies on parade. And that was the only time JJ was mentioned. He wasn't mentioned that he changed the course of the trombone and jazz.
That's what
He's very hurt by that.
Stan Getz, they showed a picture of him, like obviously messed up with a T-shirt that was all wrinkled. They didn't mention Weather Report. They didn't mention Ahmad Jamal.
Yeah.
I mean, the things they left out, and they glanced over. I mean, I played with Charles Lloyd. We were the pioneer band in the '60s. We took jazz to the Soviet Union and to the Fillmore, where people could go in. It wasn't based on alcohol anymore. Anybody could go in. You could hear three bands, watch a light show for $3. You could sit on the floor. You didn't have to sit in rows holding your hands. And they didn't even mention it. You know, it just like was a footnote. I mean, very selective. And all the people he had on the panel, I mean, were very opinionated. Stanley being one of them.
Yeah.
It was a race, really, you know, did a lot of damage. I threw things at the TV. I couldn't stand it.
I actually was, I was staying at somebody's house, so I didn't have the liberty of throwing things at his TV, but I would have. Were the TV mine? Yeah, that was, but, so, you know, there's so much more we could do and talk about and everything, but I think we're kind of, so I was wondering, when do you start? You started on piano.
I started on accordion when I was 5. I came from New Haven. I just found out I'm 45% Italian. My father went to his grave thinking he was German, and McClure could not possibly be my last name. My father and his mother were 100% Italian.
Oh.
Proved that. So I got to high school and they said, well, we want you in the band and we need a bass player. So that's what you'll do. And you won't take creative writing because that meets the same time as the band. And what have I done every day since then? I've typed and played the bass since, you know, it really, they gave me some skills I really could use. And I played the piano I got in high school. I just kind of taught myself.
What was you remember the first record that you ever bought?
Blue Train.
Blue Train. So you'd already listened to jazz.
Yeah, that was my first jazz record. I was listening to Art Van Dam because I played accordion.
Right.
I played with this kid, Tommy Brazil, in New Haven. He was a tenor player. We were both 16, 15, 1956. And he came in and sat in with this band, the Kingsmen, that I played with. It was a bunch of Yale guys. And he blew the roof off the place, and he sounded like Johnny Griffin and Coltrane. And I said, what is this music you're playing? He said, you got to get this new record, Blue Train. And that same year, Miles did Cooking, Working, Steaming, and Relaxing. That's all with Paul Chambers. 5 albums. I had just started playing the bass, and he said, that's how you play the time. And that's the kind of sound, and that's what I imitated. 10 years later, he left and I took his gig. You know, I mean, I had digested that music. I learned, I knew how to play like him.
What was the name of this tenor player?
Tommy Brazil in New Haven. He never did anything. He was great when he was 15, 16 years old. I mean, phenomenal. He could have been anybody. He could have made it if he had his head together, but he passed away, and he never got out of East Haven, Connecticut, really. There were other people in Connecticut. Kenny Duca, accordion player. People that I grew up playing with who taught me about jazz that never, I put all my eggs in one basket and came to New York with my bass in 1963, like Steve Swallow had done. He quit Yale to come to New York to play jazz. I thought that was heroic. So that was the reason I came here, you know. And my teacher.
You knew Swallow at that time? Did you know Steve at that time?
I did, yeah, he encouraged me. Like, he said, did you play with Marion McPartland? I said, no. He said, well, you will.
And you did?
I did. Yeah.
Well,
on me and Eddie Gomez in Downbeat in 1960. I was, out on the road with Wynton Kelly. They couldn't find me to take a picture, so I didn't get my picture in Dobby, but there was a story. We got
Well, I remember actually we made a beautiful record that isn't in your discography, but I liked it. And Kenny Barron actually told me years later, like a good 10, 15 years after we did that, he said he had that in his car. He still had a cassette of it that he would play, that he really liked this record we did called Bob Mover on the record, the company was Vanguard Records.
Yeah, I remember the date.
And that was a beautiful band. That was Kenny and Ben and Ben Riley and you and Claudio Raditi and me.
Your record, I guess you were on it.
What's that?
Your record, I guess you were on it too.
That was my record.
That's why I guess you were on it.
Yeah, I was on it. Yeah, yeah, it was my record. That was but we, the band that didn't record too. That was we had that gig at Sweet Basil's. We did Sunday and Monday.
You should record it.
For over a year, or we do 1 week a month.
Yeah,
I mean, 1 week in a month.
Yeah, that's recorded.
And the other people we'd have when Kenny and Ben were out with Ron Carter, who had the quartet at that time, where he was playing the piccolo bass.
Yeah,
he had that, and we'd have Albert Daly.
Yeah,
and often Tom Harrell and Claudio would alternate.
All those guys, know them all.
And that was where I learned to play, really.
Yeah. I mean, I came to New York in '63. I mean, I'd already played in Hartford as the house bass player for a number of years going to college. I mean, with guys like Mike Manieri would come up. I mean, Horace Parlin, Wayne Andre, Dick Johnson. There were, a lot of piano players. I played with
Dick Johnson, the alto player.
No, he was a piano player.
Okay, different piano player, because there was an alto player too in Boston.
Up there, I mean, and played with me and Joe Porcaro. We were the house rhythm section. So I played with all these guys. When I came to New York, Mike Manieri got me with Buddy Rich, and Michael Benny was on that band, and he got me with Maynard after that.
Right, and
so that's how the link, it's all. I can tell you why I got every gig I ever got. And so, go up, or somebody I played with recommended me to somebody. That's how it works. I mean, they didn't get my name out of the union book,
Yeah, I mean, well,
it doesn't work like that.
Well, being a wonderful bass player like that, all those opportunities. I mean, so you even had a gig with Monk at one point, right? You have a.
So Bobby Colombi's brother, Jules Colombi, and I were friends. We would go to Hall Overton's jazz class at the New School. And he's responsible for, I was teaching at Berkeley, and he said Monk was coming up. He needed a bass player. And also, I think he's instrumental in getting me with Blood, Sweat, and Tears when the Jimmy Fielder left, because I got a call from Bobby Colombi while I was living in San Francisco in December of '73. And he just offered me the gig. So I came back east and joined the band for like 4 years.
So you had a Boston experience too. So you taught at Berkeley?
I taught at Berkeley for a year. I left there screaming. Students a week, a couple acoustic bass players, and half-hour lessons, 50 of them, and 6 hours of ensemble. I called what's his name that ran the ensemble?
Larry Monroe.
No, it wasn't him. It was the alto player.
I thought that was Larry Monroe, but.
And I said, well, I mean, I got a guy in my trumpet player in my ensemble that can't get a sound out of his instrument. What am I supposed to do with him? He said, your job is to teach, not make value judgments. About education. Don't give anybody any reason to complain, and don't complain yourself, and you'll be all right.
Well, I went to teach at Berkeley. I went to Boston because I felt I needed a year off. I was about 28, a year off from New York, because I was just having too good a time. And you were part of that good time, so you know what I mean. With all these things we were talking about, Bradley's. And I said, I'll go to Boston. And I had a brief marriage that didn't work out, but I thought I'd get away from the scene. So I said, I'll teach at Berkeley. So Larry Monroe and Alex Ulanowski invited me to a lunch at the Newberry Steakhouse. And the lunch consisted of vodka martinis. That was where we started and pretty much where we finished. So they said, well, how many hours do you want? I said, I want to teach full time. I've never done it, and I thought I'd like to do it. They said, no, that's out of the question. You're not going to teach full time. I said, why not? They said, well, we're going to give you a couple of ensembles and a few private students. We're not going to enough to live on, and you'll get gigs, but we don't want to be. I said, why? They said, well, if we gave you a full teaching load, you would start out okay, but in a little bit of time, you would be upset, you would be angry, you would be bitter. It would take your beautiful disposition and destroy it. It probably would destroy your music too. And we do not want to be the guys that killed Bob Mover. So we're giving you a limited amount of a limited schedule. So I taught 3 semesters, and then Chet Baker called me, and he said, "You're teaching at Berkeley?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Don't you think you're a little young to be out to pasture? Come to Europe with me." So he took me away from it.
I left screaming, and I moved back to California after that 1 year there. But I was playing with Gary Burton at Slugs with Pat Revelo and Bill Goodman. We played at Slugs for a week. And Gary said he and Joe Henderson were starting at Berkeley that year, 1971. And so I said, "Did they need a bass player?" So Gary called Bob Scher, who was the head of the jazz department.
I think he was the head of the school.
Bob Scher, he was the head of the school. I guess he wasn't a dean, he was something else. So he set up an audition or an interview with me. So I went up there, and they hired me. And at the end of the year, I mean, half the people didn't show up, but we didn't have cell phones, or all I had is their mailbox number, I didn't have their phone number. I couldn't text them, email. I never saw them. One guy never showed up. And so at the end of the year, I wanted to talk to him about the next year. And he said, "Well, we hear you have an attendance problem." And I said, "Yeah, there are people that," one guy never showed up, and a lot of people just never showed up. I said, "No, we meant you." This guy came to his lesson on the 10th week or something for the first time. By that time, I was out, playing pool with Mick Goodrick or someplace for that hour because he didn't come. So I threw the key at the guy and I left. And I said, "You got it, man. This is like a little game you're playing with me. I don't want any more of this place." That was before they had a union, and now we have a union at NYU too. We have the UAW. We got a huge raise, a 34% raise, and a bonus last year. I mean, I was teaching there for units for like 20. I mean, now it came through UAW.
So when you were up in Boston, did you get to play with Jimmy Mosher? Did you know Jimmy at all?
No, him, but I didn't play. I knew a bass player. What's there? Forgot his name.
John Neves?
John Neves. Yeah. Racing Great Tantisi, I played a gig with him.
Right, Muzzy. And was Charlie Mariano around at that time? Or?
He had been there before that. Charlie lived with me for 3 months. When he came back, he was thinking about moving back to the United States. He stayed with me when I was still living up in Ardsley. And we did a record with Mike Knock called Magic Mansions with Al Foster. And we would stay at my house. He made Indian food and Italian food. He played the not visa room, the double reed instrument Indian. It was like
right, the Nagaswar, however they say that, yeah.
Like that.
You play Sweet Basil?
Yeah, we play Sweet Basil, and he would go up in the attic and play that instrument.
I remember Charlie was sitting there playing bebop in a cross-legged position on a pillow on the bandstand.
Yeah, I remember I heard a story that he was doing an ensemble, and he looked at these kids and he said, "You guys suck." And that story got around like a virus, like I can hear him saying that. I was playing with him one night, and he said, "How could you play something so beautiful 1 minute and play something so fucking stupid like 1 minute later?"
He said this to you?
I mean, those moments of epiphany you don't forget, I playing something with him, and I threw something away. It was nice. He liked it. Then suddenly we were playing, and I got serious, and I fucked up somehow. And he said that to me. The way he said it, he's so fucking stupid,
Lynn, Massachusetts, it's a tough town he came from.
He had a way of speaking that was.
He had a strong Boston accent. He had that real.
In New York, he came and looked at it again, and the city he knew wasn't here anymore.
New York.
Yeah, he was living in Germany, doing well for a long time, and he came back, and I mean, nobody knew him. I mean, nobody he knew was still around. I mean, it was a whole different scene. But he was really thinking about coming back because he had kids here.
Yeah, I mean, well, it happens. You know, when I came back after I left New York in about 1983, and I stayed away until 1997. That's right. I came back and nobody, nobody remembered me. I had to start all over again in a way.
I played with Charles Lloyd for years, and none of the New York cats paid any attention to that band. They said, "Well, Charles Lloyd, he plays out of tune." Then nobody listened to those records. They didn't. And like when that band was over, I mean, it was like falling off a cliff. I mean, I had to start all over again, getting gigs in New York.
Yeah, that's funny. I had a funny Charlie Mariano thing though that was funny. Mike Knock had a Christmas party that year, and remember Mike had that big loft.
Yeah.
And he was married to that Brazilian woman at that time.
Buildner.
Yeah, and I think you were at this party too.
I was at this wedding.
Yeah, so there was this big, large party, and it looked like breakfast at Tiffany's. The party scene, it was so crowded, it was so New York that the people were packed. And Charlie was wearing this all white silk kind of Indian suit. It was all, kind of a white, almost Nehru type of outfit. And I had never met Charlie before. And Mike introduced me, and I had wanted to talk to this guy for years. So I think I talked his ear off. And he was very polite about it. And we talked about things, everything from what kind of reeds do you use to what kind of women do you like. And we're talking, and I was drinking red wine. And while I was drinking the wine, somebody bumped into me, trying to get past me. And the wine went splash all over Charlie's white Indian Nehru suit. And I was mortified, Ron. I'm sitting there going, oh, shit. So I'm like, Charlie, look, man, send me the cleaning bill. I'll take care of it. I'm terribly sorry. Sorry. And he looks at me, and a little moment, a beat passes, and he says, well, I think that you should get another glass of wine.
A bottle of wine over, trying to get into a table at Bradley's once. I was going sideways, tables are close together. This bottle of wine was right at the edge of the table, and I bumped it, and it just fell over and poured into this woman's lap. I know the feeling, having done something like that.
Yeah, but to one of your idols, it's even worse. But well, there were so many cats that I wanted to ask you about too. Other people on the scene. Wilbur Ware.
Robert, I knew him in Hartford. He'd come up to Hartford. He had a girlfriend in Hartford, and I saw him, and I had a gig, and I had a bass, and he said, "Ronnie, give me your gig." He said, "And give me your bass." He tried to grab my bass, and I ran down the street, and he chased me. Widow was at the Cassandra's on 133rd Street.
Were you running with the bass?
Yeah, I ran faster than he could with the bass. I was probably in better shape then. He wanted my gig and my bass, and I knew him a little bit. Because he come to Hartford a lot of times. And he was on the scene. But his wife Gloria recommended the doctor that replaced both of my knees.
You had knee replacements. You've had some physical ailments.
Yeah, they were like gone. I played tennis and baseball. Nice new titanium, plastic, and polymer knees work just fine.
And well, yeah, there's so many. Did you know Jimmy Garrison?
No, I didn't know him. I saw him at the half note with Coltrane, and he walked by me with McCoy when Coltrane and Elvin were playing drums and tenor. He walked by me on the way out. I was sitting at the bar having my meatball sandwich, and he said, "Let's go to Pookie's Pub. These motherfuckers are going to play for an hour." And they did. So I heard, and I heard him play. I saw him, but you never heard the bass in those days. I saw Paul Chambers. I saw Wynton Kelly with Paul Chambers. I saw Doug Watkins with Billy Taylor at the Hickory House. I mean, you couldn't hear him. I saw Scott LaFaro with Bill Evans at the Vanguard.
You did see that band.
At the Vanguard. I saw him at the Birdland opposite Count Basie. I saw him, you couldn't hear him. And they probably didn't have a mic for the bass, and even in those days. I mean, it was like, and all the gigs I did with Charles Lloyd and Wes Montgomery, I never heard myself while I was playing. But the records came out, and the radio recordings heard the bass very well.
There you are, yeah.
They came out, yeah, I heard myself. I said, gee, I didn't know I played that good. I couldn't hear it. I just played what I was hearing, and I knew how to play the bass well enough to know where the notes were, I guess, you know. But I really rarely heard myself in those days.
That you had to really, yeah, the bass was felt. And then pickups came in, and all you heard was bass for a while.
Well, now with the amp, now I play fretless electric bass now, and like I can get a beautiful woody sound, and you hear every note is even. I mean, so much easier now.
So somebody told me a Stan Getz story where the bass player was leaving Stan, and I think it was San Francisco. He had a bass player to replace him, and so at the sound check with the new bass player, the bass player brought in an amp, and the amp was one of those very tall, big 5-foot high amps.
Yeah.
And you probably know Stan turned to the bass player, and they hadn't played yet. He said, "You're already too loud."
I had this acoustic 136 amp, which is about 3 feet high, with a big 15-inch speaker, and I brought it to Chicago. We're playing at the Jazz Showcase on in the Loop, and he was always in the back of me messing with the dials. One night he just turned it off, and he said,
"Joe Siegel."
We played his place. Yeah, I think it was him. But we were playing, and Stan finally turned my bass amp off in the middle of a tune.
Stan turned your bass off. Yeah,
that's what I'm talking about. And he said, "Make them come to you." That's one of the moments of epiphany that I never forgot.
That's a beautiful story. Make them come to you.
Yeah. And I read Ray Brown, and I was playing with Maynard's band. Willie Maiden introduced me to him up in Toronto. And I said, Ray, I mean, how do I, get to hear myself in this band? I mean, it's so loud. And he said, well, tell those trumpet players if they can't hear you, they're playing too loud. I mean, I remember thinking, Mel Lewis said, kind of loud, isn't it? Except for Dennis Irwin. And he explained that if you play your amp too loud, it makes the whole dynamic of the band different. They start to overplay, and the time suffers, and the sound, the whole thing changes.
That's true.
I want to hear more of you, less of your amp. My amp.
Yeah, that's well, you've gleaned so much wisdom, man.
Well,
these years.
I'm gonna be 83 in 5 months. I mean, if I live that long, I'm working on it,
Well, you're doing well, and we're so happy to have you with us.
Well, and viewed,
Well, we got older. I mean, I was at one night I was at Birdland, actually listening to Paul Bley, and I went into the back room, and I saw this old Japanese guy. He was staring at me, and I was looking back at him, and it turned out to be Masabumi Kikuchi, Busan, as we used to call him, piano player.
Yeah,
he said it in such a Japanese way. He said to me, "Oh, Bob, last time we saw each other, we were young men."
Yeah. Yeah.
And but it's So anyway, man, we could go on and on. You told me you got a gig coming up, which sounds really good, with Barry Finnerty and Randy Brecker and
recording with Lenny White, Randy Brecker, I think Hubert Laws, and for Barry Finnerty.
Yeah, Barry Finnerty's a very fine guitar player.
Coming back from San Francisco, he's doing some kind of Brecker brother reunion with Randy, and then we're going to do this record on the 24th, allegedly.
And are you playing upright and electric, or you were?
I'm playing upright with that. I played I teach mostly electric bass at NYU, and I got it to fretless bass, and I did this gig yesterday with Tommy Morimoto with my little Yamaha electric bass, and I have this little Phil Jones amp that weighs 8 pounds. You get a sound, and everybody can hear every note. You carry this big fucking bass around. I love playing it, but I mean, I just don't want to carry it on the subway, turnstiles and, subways, stairs, and, on the bus and people bumping it. I mean, it's a pain in the butt. I love playing it, but please get it there for me, or have one there for me waiting.
I understand.
I don't really want to schlep it anymore. I can, but I don't want it.
Anyway, Ron, this has been great.
Yeah.
It's been fascinating, and hopefully we'll do another one. And it's sure going to be. It's been fun to sit down with you and get to know each other again a little. And
it's been a long time.
And I thank you. And Jesse Kaiser is back. I just.
Yes.
And, I want to thank everybody for watching this. And I want to thank the great Ron McClure for sharing all these wonderful experiences and the wisdom he's gleaned from all of that. I sure learned a lot.
I did not lie.
No, you never did.
No, it's my dad. Richard Butters did this. The best thing and the worst thing about you is you tell the truth at any expense, and probably at the wrong time most of the time. I point out things that are wrong at the worst possible time.
you,
I'm trying to handle that a little better.
I think you handled it pretty well.
Well, thank you for thinking of me. I mean, I'm honored to be part of your podcast.
Well, we're honored to have you, man. And, we want to thank you again and say to everyone, thank you. And if you, if you want to give us a like at Bob Mover Jazzability, we appreciate it because it keeps us going. And I think it's important that we do keep going because we get people to talk to people like Ron McClure this way.
It might as well be you.
Yeah, well.
You're good at it. That's really good questions. I've done some interviews with people that ask me, what do you think of Latin percussion in the Bay Area? I said, why would you ask somebody like me a question like that?
Well, I think of this more. I mean, I do ask you questions, and I want to know more about you than I want to talk about me. But it helps to talk a little about me because it's like a discussion. That way, I don't like so much. I was interviewed a couple of weeks ago, and it was like what I call the "and then I wrote" type of thing. And then you did this, and then you did that. But I want to talk about your experience because it's a great story. That will be a great story in your book. You got a title for it yet?
No. Nobody comes to see the bass player. I don't know. I used to call it the post-bop journal, and I'm thinking of titles and writing them down. I mean, I don't know. I think it should be 2 or 3 words.
Yeah, try a more positive approach. What's that? It's my only advice. Perhaps a more positive approach might be.
I don't know.
Nobody comes to see the bass player.
I hope to finish. Call it whatever you want. I think we'll call it Bob.
Oh no!
I don't know. Anyway, there goes Bob. Who?
Ron McClure speaks.
Yeah, man.
All right. I'm not a title guy either. All right.
So,
thank you, and thank you, Jesse Kaiser, and thanks everybody for listening. And we'll be back soon with another On the Real Side.
Over and out.
Over and out.